My name's Catherine Jellison. I'm chair of the Department of History. And the first thing I want to do is join the growing chorus of people thanking Tim and Brian for a great conference. So one more round of applause. And now it's my great honor and very great pleasure to introduce Chief Glenna Wallace. This is the second time in less than 2 years I've had this honor of introducing Chief Glenna to a room full of conference goers. In May 2018, Chief Glenna participated in the Rural Women's Studies Association conference, and we had a great bonding experience on a tour bus through the little cities of Black Diamonds. And it must have been a positive experience for Chief Glenna because she came back. And in fact, she's told me that that was one of the highlights of that trip, the tour through many of our local historic sites. Well, following a long career as an educator and administrator at Crowder College in Missouri, in 2006, Glenna Wallace was elected chief of the Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma, the first woman to hold this important position. And in that position, and in her role as an educator and as not only a tribal leader, but a community leader in general, she's earned many prestigious awards. Although Chief Glenna now resides several states away from Ohio, Ohio remains a special place to her and to other members of her tribe. Following the Indian Removal Act of 1830, the U.S. government forced the Shawnee to leave their Ohio Valley home for reservations in Oklahoma and Kansas. But in speaking about the relationship between the Shawnee and Ohio, Chief Glenna notes, we are still here in a certain way. We are here in our hearts. So please help me welcome Chief Glenna Wallace.
Hatito, hagawasi lasi mamo, niwisi lasi mamo. I have said to you hello. I have hoped that you are doing well today. And I am apologizing that I have a terrible cold, a worse throat. I've been sucking on lemons, doing everything I can, but worried that I won't make it through this speech without cough, 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 cough. So I may not be asked back. I too want to thank Tim and Brian for everything that they have done. We can't begin to imagine the amount of work, the amount of details, not only that they've done thus far, but it doesn't end because they will have more to do when we leave. And so I'm indebted to them, and I think it's been a fantastic conference and one that I hope will continue. So again, they deserve still yet another round of applause. My presentation will be different because I'm not one to bring you pretty pictures. I'm not one to write an academic paper. I'm one that I usually have a little slip about that big, and that's enough to get me started and to go the direction that I want to go, and so I hope that works today. I'm going to start out with a fellow tribal citizen by the name of Alistair McBain. Alistair lives in Denver, Colorado. Alistair is a talented artist, but recently I heard Alistair, and not knowing that he did this, he was doing a storytelling event, and he was on The Moth, which is pretty famous. So it's a podcast, and maybe you have heard Alistair, and if not, well, you can to go and hear him again. But we have something in common, and it will take me a little while to get there, but I hope to make that connection. As I said, Alistair lives in Denver, Colorado. And Alistair has a friend that, the friend is a Cherokee. Alistair is Eastern Shawnee. And the friend was asking Alistair to go home with him there in Oklahoma to his Cherokee family and to spend a week with them. And he told Alistair, I do have to tell you in advance, we will be staying at my mother's home. And I do have to tell you my mother is a rather insistent lady. She's accustomed to having her way. And I do have to tell you my mother is a Christian, and she expects everybody else to be a Christian. And I won't say anything beyond that, he said. Alistair looked at him and said, well, I respect the Christian faith, but I have my own Shawnee beliefs. Do you think we can get along for a week? And the gentleman said, yes, I think we can. So Alistair said, all right, I'll go home with you. And so he went to Oklahoma, went to fellow Cherokees and spent the week and met his friend's mother. His friend's mother was named Myrtle, and Alistair immediately began calling her Miss Myrtle. So Miss Myrtle this and Miss Myrtle that. And they had a good week. Once or twice in that week, Miss Myrtle suggested that, when are you leaving, Alistair? And Alistair said, I think we're leaving Monday. And she said, that means you'll be here Sunday. And Alistair said, yes, Miss Myrtle, I'll be here Sunday. Miss Myrtle didn't say anything else that day. But the next day, Miss Myrtle slyly approached that subject again, and she said, you know, I will be going to church Sunday morning, Alistair. Would you like to go with me? And Alistair said, well, how nice of you to ask me, Miss Myrtle. I'm not sure. Well, before you make up your mind and before you say no, remember, Alistair, it's Mother's Day. And Alistair said, I understand, Miss Myrtle, but didn't say anything else. Then late Saturday evening, Miss Myrtle came to Alistair again and said, Alistair, you haven't said whether you would go to church with me or not, but Alistair, it has been a long time since I took a visitor to our church, and I would really like for you to go with me. And I don't ordinarily ask for a Mother's Day present, but I can't think of a better Mother's Day present than for you to go with me to church. And Alistair felt that he had no choice whatsoever. So the next morning, he went to church with Miss Myrtle. He thought that's all that it would be, but that's not the situation at all. When they get into the pew, Miss Myrtle says, Alistair, it's not uncommon for our guests to sing a hymn. And Alistair looked at her and sing a hymn. And he's thinking to himself, I don't believe I even know a hymn. And he's saying, well, Miss Myrtle, I don't have a very good voice. And Miss Myrtle said, oh, I would love to have you sing a hymn. I would love to hear you. You know, it is Mother's Day. So Alistair is sitting there thinking, but Miss Myrtle, I don't have a good voice. Oh, it doesn't matter. God loves all voices. And so when the moment came, Miss Myrtle introduced Alistair as saying he's going to sing a hymn. And Alistair felt that he had no choice, and he's trying to think, do I know a hymn? Do I know a hymn? What is a hymn? And then he suddenly thinks, I think I know one. Michael, row your boat ashore. And so Alistair is basically shoved out of the pew, and he heads up front, and he's not known for his singing voice. And he starts, Michael, row your boat ashore, hallelujah. And he can't think of anything else. And he thought, what am I going to do? I can't just sing one line. There's such a thing as a refrain, so I'll go, Michael, row your boat ashore. Hallelujah. And he did that for 16 lines. Because he was afraid that if he didn't take enough time, they might ask him some questions. And that was all he knew about the song. He was afraid somebody will say, who's Michael? And he would say, I don't know who Michael is. And what shore are you talking about? I have no idea what shore I'm talking about. So 16 times. And he noticed that at first his friend was sitting up straight in the pew. But as each line continued, the friend began to slouch more and more. When he finished the 16th line, Alistair walked back to the pew, had to cross in front of his friend, and his friend looked at him and said, dude. And he sat down by Miss Myrtle, and Miss Myrtle said, I've never met a person who didn't know a hymn. What a Mother's Day. And Alistair says he's never been invited back again. So because I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you, because I don't have a planned, documented paper with sources, because I'm not reading to you, because I'm not talking about an academic subject, I may never be invited back again. So that's what I have in common with my friend Alistair McBain. When I received an invitation from Brian, and he told me about this conference, I asked him, well, what is it that you want me to do? And I decided I wasn't too smart because I didn't look at the schedule, and when I did look at the schedule, I noticed most of the others were up here as a team, as a pair or something, but definitely not alone, as far as an hour and 15 minutes, so they didn't have to talk too long. When I looked at the schedule, it has me for an hour, and I don't know that I can sing Michael, Row Your Boat Ashore for that long or not. And I said, well, what is it that you would like as the end to this conference? And he said, well, I personally think that if you could talk something about balancing history and legacy, that would be an appropriate conclusion. And so taking his words, balancing history and legacy, it seems to me that most of this conference, the theme has been history, and that's appropriate. And that is what has been discussed, and it's been interesting history. And so, yes, we as Shawnees, we were here. I enjoyed the tour that Catherine spoke about so very much because I was amazed. I had never been to Athens before. I've been to Ohio several times, but I had never been to Athens before. And I was amazed at the similarity between this county and the county where my tribe is, Ottawa County in northeast Oklahoma. So first, let me just tell you about my county, and to realize that when I talk about legacy, at this point it seems that our legacy is we still have a love for this land. Our legacy is we have left some names. You do encounter the word Shawnee, you do encounter the word Wyandotte, you do encounter the name Miami, etc. And so we have left that legacy. But that's not a legacy that I want to stop there. I want that legacy to increase. And maybe I'm a little bit like Miss Myrtle. I have a direction I want it to go, you know. So I have a hymn that I want you to sing along with me, I might say. So in the county where we are, the Indian Removal Act was passed in 1830. We were the first who were forced to leave. The Shawnees at that time lived with the Senecas on a small reservation. called Lewistown near Wapakoneta. We were told that we had to leave, and we were promised that we would have 60,000 acres in a land that was known as Indian Territory, not even a state. 1832. We left in September. They wanted us to go by rivercraft, and our ancestors refused. Our ancestors did not trust the armed forces, the government, the Ohio people, anyone, because of the things that had happened to them in the past. They truly had been given blankets with smallpox, and the intent was not to keep them warm. They feared the ships, that they didn't have enough control over the boats. They feared that they might catch fire. They feared that they would be held captive, and they feared that they would not arrive, that it was another means of eliminating the Native American. And so my ancestors said, we will leave this land, we have no choice, but we will leave this land exactly as we came to this land, and that is by foot, on horseback. Maybe we'll go with some wagons back, but we will not go by your watercraft. And so that is what happened. And they left in September, and they did not arrive to Indian Territory until December 1832. Wonderful time to be out of food, to be out of money, to be taken to the wrong place. They took them to Cherokee lands, not even to the lands where they had intended for them to go. 20% of our people died on that removal march. And just before 1900, my tribe was down to only 69 people. Those 69 people equated to, if not a loss, definitely a long-term disappearance of many, many things that we are still trying to bring back because of that removal and because of the death of so many people. We were placed in a state that is next to Indian Territory, a state that is known as Missouri, a state that did as Ohio. Ohio has no federally recognized tribes today. The state of Missouri has no federally recognized tribes. Missouri also forced them out and said, we do not want Indians here. From 1832 until 1867, we were still together with the Seneca tribe. We were known as the Mixed Band, and we did have that 60,000 acres. They lived on one portion of it, we lived on another, so we weren't intermingled, we were separated. Not by violence, not by hatred or anything else, we just simply, they had their language, we had our language, they had their ceremonial rites. At that time, we had our ceremonial rites. And while they complement, they were not identical, and so we were two separate. As you well know, we can talk a little bit about history. 1860, something called the Civil War. The Civil War, we received no protection whatsoever. We were there on lands that we had been pushed onto, but we were next to a state that did not want Indians there. And we had a United States who had to be concerned with the Civil War. So how much law enforcement, how much protection, how much care did they give to struggling Native Americans? You can imagine. And so we had to leave. Now, we were the only tribes from this area, from Ohio, that went directly to Indian Territory. The Miami tribe, the Wyandot tribe, the others, they went to Kansas first. We did not. We went directly to Indian Territory. And so we had to leave any improvements that had been made, anything that we had accomplished or that my ancestors had accomplished, and we had to go to Kansas, and we used the phrase that we were on the blanket of the Ottawas that they said, come spend time on our blanket. And so we went there for protection during that Civil War because there was nothing where we were. In 1867, after the Civil War had ended, there were several tribes there in Kansas. An omnibus treaty was signed, and those tribes then had another removal to come to Oklahoma. Many of those tribes, yes, they paid money, but it was pennies. And so that 60,000 acres, 12,000 went to the Ottawas, the Wyandottes took 25,000, the Miamis took some. And then after that, the United States government did something that's called the Dawes Act. In a further way to reduce tribes and the unity in a tribe, before our land had all been held as a reservation in the name of the tribe. Individuals did not have individual properties, did not own property. But with the Indian Allotment Act, land was given to each tribal citizen. That took absolutely all of the land away from the tribe. And even though we didn't have enough tribal members to use up all of that land, the government took what did not go to allotment and put it back in its pool to sell and to give to other people. So the 60,000 acres that we were promised when we left this land, we didn't become a tribe that had a constitution until 1939. So from 1832 to 1939. At one time, we could tell you very little about our tribe. I could not stand up here and give you a full academic paper unless I researched it tremendously, because we didn't have time to research. We didn't have time to study history. We were struggling to just stay alive. And so in 1939, when our tribe was formed, and we had our first constitution and our first charter, 2 years earlier, we had a tribal citizen who owned almost 60 acres that was given to her as an allotment. That tribal citizen had married, and had married a Kiowa Indian near Colony, Oklahoma. And so that tribal citizen contacted the government and said, would it be possible for me to trade my allotment here and receive land there in my husband's area because he has a job there? The government said, we can't trade, but we will buy. We will buy because even though there isn't a registered, official, federally recognized Shawnee tribe right here, they are in the process. And once they get finished, then we will give that land to them. They paid $2,000 for 58.19 acres, and that's the 58.19 acres that we ended up with out of 60,000. That's the land that we owned and all that we owned from 1939 until 1987. 58.19 acres. It was not 58.19 acres that we chose. It was not a place where we wanted. It did not have specific advantages, because even today we are unique in that we are located on the Missouri line, and you cannot get to our tribe from Oklahoma. So you drive down Highway 10 or you drive down Highway 60, you leave Oklahoma, you go into the state of Missouri, and then you circle back and go back into Oklahoma. We have 9 federally recognized tribes in one small county there in Oklahoma. 9, the most of any place in the United States. The county is very similar to what is here. We are known as a strike force county, and the definition of a strike force county is that you are a certain percentage below poverty level, and you have been for at least 20 consecutive years. We have been below for more than 30 consecutive years. There was a time when there was affluence in that county. We had lead and zinc mining, And the Quapaw Indians, that's where most of it occurred on their land. So there were some Indians who did prosper from that. But at that time, there were no laws that caused those lead and zinc mining companies to be responsible for the pollution, for the damages that they were doing. And when they left leaving everything. We are supposedly a flat area, but when people come, they will say, well, what are those hills over there? What are those little mountains over there? They are chat piles, the tailings, the remains, when they dug down into the ground. Our waters are polluted, and I was shocked when I took that tour and I saw the orange and the red waters there, because those are the orange and the red waters that we have in Ottawa County. It's called Tar Creek, and it goes throughout. We flood frequently, so there are many, many reasons why we are a poor county. And then put 9 federally recognized tribes in one county that has a population of 32,000 or less. And it continues to be less because of the pollution and because of the problems that we have. So that's the dream that we had, that they were taking us to lands that were as wonderful as the lands here, lands where we would be able to live the way we wanted to, and those were the promises. So what's our legacy in Ohio? I'm going to read a passage from David McCullough's book. It's not a pleasant passage, but it is a passage. This is talking about Charles Dickens when he was here, and he was making his observations. If there was a reality of American life that Francis Trollope and Charles Dickens and others found most disgraceful and unacceptable, it was the removal of the native tribes to more remote reservations to the west, brought on by the members of Congress. If the American character may be judged by their conduct in this matter, wrote Mrs. Trollope, they are most deficient of every feeling of honor and integrity. It was impossible for any mind of common honesty not to be revolted by the contradiction in their principles and practice. Dickens encountered firsthand one of the last phases of the removal. It occurred in northeastern Ohio, still mostly wilderness, as he and his wife were heading by stagecoach toward Niagara and ultimately home to England. At Upper Sandusky, a Wyandotte village on Lake Erie, they stopped for the night. Upper Sandusky was one of about 16 locations where the tribes of Ohio, more than 2,000 Shawnee, Seneca, Delaware, Ottawa, and Wyandottes, had been forced to remove as a result of the removal bill enacted in 1830. At breakfast the morning after his arrival, Dickens listened to the federal agent for the Wyandottes, Colonel John Johnston, that you just heard referenced in the previous speech, deliver a moving account of their strong attachment to the familiar scenes of their infancy, and in particular to the burial places of their kindred, and of their great reluctance to leave them. We met some of those poor Indians afterwards, riding on shaggy ponies, Dickens continued. They looked to him like gypsies. Later that summer, the Wyandottes departed for Cincinnati, where they were to go by steamboat to reservations farther west. They were the last of the natives to leave Ohio. Only the Indian names were to remain. There are words in that passage that refer to the legacy that I want to talk about. I am afraid that perhaps still at this point, perhaps definitely more at earlier times, but our legacy has been connected to a word that is difficult for me to always acknowledge, and that word is savage. David McCullough even writes about that. When he talks about Rufus Putnam said, "A horrid, savage war faces us." And then he talks about a gentleman by the name of Matthew Kearns, and said Matthew Kearns was gunned down and he was scalped by the Indians. His son Hamilton sought revenge, and as revenge he shot and killed an Indian, cut off his head, fixed that head to a pole, and marched it back to the stockades. As a small boy, Horace Nye remembered seeing Kerr bring home what he considered to be a trophy. And later, when this small boy became a man, he wrote, "Some whites are more savage than the Indian." I don't think either you or I can deny the fact that there were savage acts that happened in the past. But I also don't think we can deny that it was just one race. That is not the legacy that I want left for Native Americans in the state of Ohio. We loved this land then, we love this land now. It's still a part of our heart. It always will be. How were we treated when we went to Oklahoma? Remember, it wasn't a state until 1907. So we were there for almost 80 years before it became a state. How were we treated there? We were placed under a federal government, and we're still under a federal government. We still have to answer to something called BIA. Now, you call that Bureau of Indian Affairs. BIA, to me, as a chief, is bossing Indians around. We had to fill out competency papers. Our people were given those allotments. They'd never owned land before. They were no more trained, no more prepared to be landowners and responsible financial individuals than the blacks were prepared for freedom. They each had to fill out competency papers, and those competency papers, they were interviewed by federal people. And the questions are interesting, and reading those competency papers, extremely interesting. You can see the bias at times, definitely, in those competency papers. You can also find moments of humor. I had an Uncle Thomas who was chief of our tribe for 25 years, and I read Uncle Thomas's competency papers. And one of the questions that's on the competency papers is, do you drink? Uncle Thomas wrote, every chance I can get it. And Uncle Thomas wasn't lying, you know? So sometimes there was humor in there, but sometimes it was pathetic. Sometimes it was pitiful. They had to have permission to sell their land. If they deemed that you weren't competent, if they deemed Uncle Thomas's comment as reality and truthful, they would have said, no, he's not competent to sell his land and take this money and do something with it. No, he can't sell it. And so they were at the mercy of other people as to what they did. So it wasn't freedom. It wasn't emancipation. It was difficulty. And so when I think about the word legacy, I have to come back to that word savage, and I have to think that is not the legacy that I want to be left as Native Americans. And so I think about today, and I think about the future, and I think that you have a part in that as well as I do, a responsibility. Let me tell you just a little bit about my history, because that influences much of what I do, much of what person I am. My father was one of those lead and zinc miners. Unfortunately, he was like Uncle Thomas. He drank every chance that he could, and he didn't mean it with humor. He was a hard worker, a good worker, an excellent employee, but unfortunately, when he was paid on Friday evening, his first stop was at a bar, and he didn't come home with a whole lot of that money, and that affected the rest of us as children. Because we weren't getting ahead in doing anything financially, my father took settlement from the mines, which would be the equivalent of cashing in your 401k or your retirement program or something like that. And with that money, he bought a farm truck, big flatbed, put up wood, covered it with a tarpaulin, and lo and behold, early 1940s, we were some of the first RVers in the United States. And 11 of us took off for Oregon and California on the West Coast. My father, my mother, the 5 of us children, my mother's brother, his wife, and their 2 children. So 11 of us traveled to Oregon, California, Washington, and we became migrant workers. And as migrant workers, we knew as children that we had a responsibility to the family. We had to work every day, and we had a responsibility to make so much money. And so when we would get up each day, we were told, you have to do this today, you have to do this, you have to pick 50 quarts of strawberries, you need to do this, you need to do that. And my mom and dad knew how to get us to work. If we did anything over that, we were able to keep. So it was the incentive program years and years ago. I must have been a very greedy little girl because I loved that cash that was over and that I could decide what to do with it. However, there were some interesting experiences because in those 3 years that I was there on the West Coast, I can remember only one place where we had a home. We had places where we stayed, but I wouldn't call them homes. We were in that truck. We would be hired by this farmer. He would say, there's a barn over there. And so if we could pull the truck into that barn, we did so. That meant that the rain wasn't coming down upon us. If it rained, we could get out of that truck. My particular home most of the time was an ironing board that I could take out of the truck and slide it underneath, and I slept on an ironing board. So we lived in barns. We lived in, some of them did have little huts, cottages for their migrant workers. I can remember picking green beans, and the place where we picked green beans, the man was a hog farmer. You know what kind of facilities that they have for hogs. They have those little things that are called sties. We each had an individual sty. Talk about living high on the hog. We did. I can remember taking a broom and sweeping that dirt until it would glisten, make it hard, and was so proud of my housekeeping skills there. Education was easy for us. I didn't leave Oklahoma until I was in the 4th grade, and by that time I had an excellent reading ability. Math, something that would be stressed in the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I was a whiz at it, not because I was smart, not because I was exceptional, but because I used it every single day. I was either picking pints or picking quarts or picking gallons or picking pecks or doing bushels or doing 100 pounds. I was doing fractions. I was doing percentages. All of that figuring out, how much of this money do I get to keep? You know? We were living geography because we were moving constantly, and I was living psychology and sociology. Sometimes we were treated fantastic. Other times, remember who we were. We were from Oklahoma. What do they call people from Oklahoma? Okies. And Okies is not a positive word. Okies does not mean you have excellent abilities. Okies does not mean you have money. Okies means you come from a backward society. You come from poor people. You don't know very much. So connect Okies with Indians, with migrants. Can you imagine the reception we received some places? When we went to school, if the school had more than one level in its grade, we were automatically placed in the lowest level because that's what the expectation level was. If we were there 3 weeks, 4 weeks, moved up each time, get to the top of the class, go to the next school, and where did I go? to the bottom of the class. I lived with all types of people and learned a great deal from those 3 years, and so it's influenced me ever since. I learned to set goals. I learned to try to achieve those goals, and I learned the good feelings, not necessarily the financial, just how you felt good about yourself for having accomplished something. And so it influenced me. We came back. My father had tuberculosis of the spine. He had to be operated upon. And I remember the day that we went to the hospital to see him. They brought him out. We were probably there 2 or 3 hours, but he didn't say a word to us. He couldn't. He cried the entire time. I can't begin to imagine what he had to feel of seeing 5 young children, of seeing a wife who had not graduated from high school, that we didn't even have a car. And I was probably 11, maybe 12 years old at that time, and I remember standing there with those people in that waiting room, watching my father and looking at my mother, and saying, I love my mother, but I don't want to live her life. She has no options. We're going to go on welfare. And we're going to be on welfare. My father had been in the military. We're going to be on welfare until my father's pension gets through the red tape and start. And that's exactly what happened. It was at that day, being 11 or 12 years of age, that I decided then and there, I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I knew what I did not want to be. I did not want to be on welfare. I did not want to be helpless. And the only solution I knew was to pursue education. So education became important to me, and it was most interesting listening to these comments on education. I married young at the age of 16, although I was chronologically 16. Maturity-wise, I was much older than that. My husband and I had 3 children. When I first graduated, I was still in high school, graduated from high school, went on to business college, and then we started our family and had 3 children. I still had this gnawing in my bones, in my body. What if something happens to my husband like happened to my father? And while I've graduated from high school, I haven't gone beyond that because business college just won't do it. He was a very understanding man at a time when women did not go to college, when there wasn't even a scholarship form that you could fill out for women. I was able to go to the community college there, graduate there, went on to Pittsburgh, finished a master's, a bachelor's, was hired by a community college, and then, excuse me, did my EDS after that. That community college was a progressive college, was a brand new college, and so therefore it didn't have a lot of programs, and we were initiating new programs. So there were many times that I would walk into the president's office and say, we don't have such and such, and I would be glad to do this. We don't do this, but we need to. And so I wore many hats there at that college, which was good for me. Received tremendous rewards, although that wasn't the reason that I was doing it. We didn't have anything such as exchange programs, and so we initiated student exchange programs, initiated faculty exchange programs. I started out as an instructor, was promoted within 2 years to department head, then on to division head. And that division head, if you can imagine this girl who lived in a hog-sty, was named division head of communications. That's fine, I can do communications. But what was combined with it was fine arts, music, theater. What did I know about fine arts, music, theater? And when you live in the second poorest county of the entire state, how much did our area know? And so all I knew to do was take them on tour trips, take them traveling. If we don't have theater, excellent theatrical performances in our area, take them to one. And so I worked with the local tour guide, and within 2 years, I had the official title of being international director. And so 2 times a year, I was to take groups, both students and community, to foreign countries. I was able to plan those trips. And without my realizing what I was doing, I was planning trips to World Heritage Sites. I was traveling to the Great Wall of China. I was traveling to the Acropolis. I was traveling to all of those, to Stonehenge, and taking students there. And so I was able to travel to 70 countries. I was able to go to Australia, taught at 3 different institutions there for a year. And so then when I had been there 38.5 years and decided that I had a retirement plan definitely cemented and that I would have income. I'm very proud of my tribe, love my tribe, but stability is not a word that I would use to describe almost any tribe. You are an elected chief. There's no retirement system. There's no income promised whatsoever. And so I needed to know that I had that retirement system locked in. So I became chief in 2006, and in 2007, at the university, Ohio State University, they were having a lecture series on famous authors written about Native Americans or Native American topics. John Sugden was coming in from England. John Sugden had written biography of Tecumseh and had written on Blue Jacket, and I wanted to hear John Sugden speak. So I flew up here to attend Ohio State University and listen to John Sugden. The next day, Ohio State University took John Sugden and anyone who wanted to go to a place called Newark Earthworks. I had never heard of Newark Earthworks, and I had researched Ohio fairly thoroughly, not because I was becoming a chief, but in the year 2000 when I returned from Australia, the chairman of the Missouri Humanities came to my office and said, it's going to be the bicentennial of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And I happen to believe that the Indians received a short shrift in that, and I want to make sure that when we have that start in Missouri, that we acknowledge and we involve every single tribe that was mentioned in the Lewis and Clark expedition. The Shawnees were mentioned. And so I was asked to tour with Chautauqua for 4 years, giving presentations on the Shawnee tribe. I said, I can't do that. He said, why not? Your president says you can talk, that you aren't intimidated by other people. And I said, well, that's true. I can talk, and no, an audience doesn't intimidate me, but to talk, you have to have something to talk about. And I don't know the history of my tribe, and unfortunately, nor does anybody else. He said, you have a bachelor's, you have a master's, you have an EDS. Don't tell me you haven't done research. This doesn't happen until 3 years. Guess what you're going to do for the next 3 years? And so everything in my life has happened as an accident. Not that I've done it, or not that I've earned it, or merited it, or anything else. It's just these things have happened to me. And so for 3 years, I researched everything, and I came to Ohio several times. We didn't write any history about our tribe. We wrote our first history book about 3-4 years ago when we received an A&A grant, and we decided then we don't know the history of our tribe, particularly since 1832 when we came here. So we need to know what happened to us here in Indian Territory and Oklahoma. We couldn't name you our chiefs. We couldn't tell you when they were chiefs. We couldn't tell you what had happened during that time. We just simply were so poor and struggled to live that fine arts is not at the bottom of the, and not essential. And so we wrote our history book, but I had researched Ohio, Shawnee tribe, for those 3 years and knew quite a bit, and transferred then that information to performing for Chautauqua in the summertime for those 4 years. And so when I became chief and went out to Newark Earthworks, I had no idea where I was going. Had no idea what I was going to see. Was not welcomed. Newark Earthworks has a golf course on top of it. An active golf course. Newark Earthworks was having competition that particular week. And so they had all these extra golfers. And when we tried to walk to go toward the Newark Earthworks, the people, the employees who were driving the carts, etc., we were in their way. There's not any doubt about it. But I didn't appreciate being told, you're in my way, you don't belong here, get away from here, this is not for people, you're not a golfer, and that's what this is for. I did manage to finally get up on the viewing platform, and the minute I looked out and saw Newark Earthworks, because of the travels that I had done before, because of the places that I had seen, I recognized immediately, this is a treasure. This is phenomenal. And why are we having golf competitions on top of this? And why cannot the people go and visit this and see this and experience this? And why did this happen? At first, I was so excited, I was so elated, I was overjoyed. It's not Shawnees who built that. I'm not saying that. It's Native Americans. I don't know what Native Americans. I just know that's the legacy, part of the legacy that I want to live, the part of the legacy that I want to leave in Ohio for all of my ancestors, for all of the tribes that were here, with the people who accomplished that. They had to be brilliant. They had to be knowledgeable. They had to be mathematicians. They had to be astronomers. They had to have so many skills I can't begin to imagine. And they had to have dedication and perseverance. One basketful of dirt at a time. One basketful of dirt at a time. And so at first I was overjoyed. And then I became angry. Not because I was a chief, just because I was Native American. Any Native American. Our ancestors did this. And I'm not even permitted to go and to walk on this land or to see it or to have time to commune with it. To this day, there are times that I just think my responsibilities are so great and the work that I have to do is so enormous, and I get discouraged. And I will get in my car and drive just 2 or 3 short miles, and there's a herd of bison. And I will pull up beside those bison and I will sit there and I will say, give me your secrets. Tell me how you've persevered. Let me know how I can continue. Refresh my vision. You've had to have a spirit. There's had to be something about you. I need those qualities, whatever they might be. And so I was angry then. Why is it this way? And I happen to be a person that I combine my Creator and my Heavenly Father, and I don't have a conflict with that. And I remembered a scripture that I said that day, and I said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And that day it became a commitment to me that was a legacy that I wanted to make sure that survived. And so I contacted Ohio History Connection, and they have taken the leadership on this, and they are working. The nomination has been made. For those of you who are not that familiar with World Heritage, it means those sites, those places in the world that have outstanding universal value. And what do we call outstanding universal value? They have educational qualities, or they have scientific qualities, or they have cultural qualities. And all of these mounds have every one of those. There are 1,121 sites in the world. There are only 24 in the United States. 24. And they are such sites as the Grand Canyon, Chaco Canyon, Yellowstone National Park, Glacier Bay. Ohio has the opportunity to be the 25th site in the United States. I can't do that myself. I need you to be supportive, to help us to keep a legacy that might replace that word savage, and that might say there is intellect, there is vision, there is dedication, there is a love of nature, there is cultural, there is spiritual. All of that is there. Are there some other things that because of that I am wanting to protect? Yes. And you know, these are serious things. We talk about the term human remains. I'm sorry, Ohio, but you have not done all that you should. There are more than 8,000 human remains of my ancestors in your museums, in your boxes, in your homes, maybe even upon the mantles of your fireplaces. Since I have been here Thursday, I've had 3 different parties contact me and say, we have human remains. What do we do about them? I have had people from Ohio who have mailed me, that have come to my home, human remains of my ancestors because they didn't know what to do with them. Working to get those human remains buried, reconnected with Mother Earth, is a legacy that I would like to live for Ohio and for my people. We believe that if their spirit will never rest until they are reconnected with Earth. And so when I talk about those, then I have to look at the burial laws in Ohio. And I have to say, you have some of the weakest. I said some of, maybe not the last, but you have some of the weakest burial laws in the United States. Meaning that anything that is over 125 years, if a person decides to go out, dig them up, maybe they think that's a Civil War soldier, maybe they think that those buttons are there still on that uniform, they can take those off, they can sell those on eBay, they can make a good money. It's happening. And it's happening here in Ohio, probably more often than any other place. We need to change that. We need to offer greater protection for our loved ones who are deceased. And then when I talk about that, I have to talk about the dead. And again, it's a horrible passage, but David McCullough wrote about it when he wrote about talking about death. And at first he's talking about at St. Clair's defeat and talking about the number of bodies that were there. And here he's not talking about the Native American bodies, but he's talking about those who fought against the Native Americans. Removing the bodies of St. Clair's defeat proved extremely slow and difficult, buried in deep snow. They had to be uncovered. They were frozen down to the ground, and they would break to pieces when being torn loose. That's still what's happening to my ancestors here as people go out and dig and try to find them. The other part that is sad is that because we did not have cemeteries, he writes also to think of his dying buried upon vast plains where no one knows even the place of his last rest is the situation that we have. And then when people go out and dig, they are likely to encounter those human remains, and they are likely to take them and sell them. And that is a travesty. Ephraim Cutler said, "I have had rather an eventful life. I would like for each of you to have an eventful life by participating in some of this. This is what I call the legacy I would like to see left for our people, rather than a legacy of being savage people." I have several grandchildren, several great-grandchildren, and my youngest great-grandchild is 22 months of age. He was taking a bath about 3 weeks ago. He loves to be in the bathtub, and he loves to be there particularly when you let the water out, and he loves to feel that water leaving, and he loves most when it's the last layer and it's about to disappear. So he was there in the bathtub, and his mother was saying, "Come on, Beckett. The water's gone. It's time for you to get out. It's bedtime. Here's the bath towel. Let's dry, and then you need to put your PJs on and go to bed." And Beckett is 22 months old, and he said, "I don't want to, Mama." His mother repeated, "Come on, Beckett. It's bedtime. The water's all gone. I have a bath towel here. It's time for you to go to bed. We need to dry you off. We need to get your pajamas on." And the second time he said, "No, I don't want to, Mama." The third time she repeated, "Beckett," and her voice had changed by this point, "Beckett, I said it's bedtime. I said get out of that bathtub. We're going to dry you off, you're going to put your PJs on, and you're going to go to bed." And he said, "No, I don't want to, Mama. I want to lie here and think about my life." I think each of us needs to take that last line. We need to think about our lives. And I'm asking you to join with me that the history is past, and it will stay that way unless you and I and others do what we can to leave a legacy that we can be proud of. Thank you very much. Thank you. You're very, very kind. Thank you very much.
Are you willing to take questions from the audience?
Oh,
or
I can.
you can,
Unless you want to bring everybody up.
Can. Well, what's your preference?
I have no preference. I'm here to do whatever you wish.
Okay. Well, I think a few questions for Chief Glenna, and then we'll bring people up to for the round table. Yeah. So, are there any questions? Yes.
You started out speaking to us, I presume, in Shawnee. How did you learn it, and how did the language survive the terrible travails that the tribe did?
I don't speak that much of the language. I go to language classes. We do have an instructor. There are 3 federally recognized Shawnee tribes in the state of Oklahoma. One is the absentee Shawnee. We're all about to lose our Shawnee language, and in fact, most of the tribes down there are about to lose their language, and we're doing everything we can to try to preserve them. And so this gentleman is in his 70s. He didn't speak English until he started public school. So we're fortunate enough that we're able to hire him. We've been fortunate enough that we've been able to compile a dictionary. We've been able to print some small books, counting animals, so on and so forth. And we have classes every week. We're fortunate enough that right now we're working on trying to get an app that we can put on a telephone that will help us, but it is still an endangered language.
Can you tell us a little bit about your responsibilities as a chief and how you got the position?
The position is a political position. The position is an elected position. It's 4 years in term. When I was first elected, being a female was an issue. I still have letters that say someday the Eastern Shawnees will have a female, but it certainly won't be Glenna Wallace, you know, so I have those letters. I was elected, and since then I've been reelected 3 times. Being a female is not an issue now. My duties absolutely change from day to day. We work with the federal government, so there are times that I have not talked with President Trump, but I did talk with Obama, did talk with Clinton, certainly talk with the governor of Oklahoma, certainly talk with our senators, our representatives, certainly talk with our tribal members, certainly talk with communities, community leaders, et cetera. So, and then there are days that I'm planning a children's Christmas party. There are days that I'm hosting Ohio History Connection has come down to see us, and we talk about World Heritage, so it's never ending. And there are days that we're fighting with the current governor, Governor Stitt, so. Mm-hmm.
Mine isn't a question, it's a comment. And early in your talk, you talked about the legacy of names. It's one of the legacies that's here in Ohio. And I grew up around Springfield, Ohio, and the high school I went to was Tecumseh High School.
Absolutely.
And of course, it was back in the 60s, and we didn't talk about Tecumseh. I didn't learn anything in my high school about Tecumseh, but because I don't really know why, but I got interested in who is this Tecumseh, and so I've done reading, and Tecumseh is one of my top heroes. And so even the legacy of a name can influence us and in a very positive way.
You are correct. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you so much
Thank you.
for coming all this way and saying all those things. And you have a challenge for us. It was general. Could you help us with some specifics to meet that challenge?
Well, we have representatives and the CEO of the Ohio History Connection who have come down here specifically because I was here today. They have meetings across Ohio talking about the nomination. Certainly they're always needing volunteers to work. Certainly they'd like you to visit the various places that are nominated. The burial laws, that's an issue that's going to be coming up before the legislature. You can talk to your legislator. You can contact Ohio History, Todd Kleisman is here. Is that correct, Todd? He's waving his hand right back there. That's something that Statehood Day is next week. Is that right? Yes. And so those are specifics. Mm-hmm.
Sure, I think they've wanted us to say just something real quick, so thank you so much, Chief Wallace, for mentioning World Heritage. Bert Logan's here, Todd Kleisman, some of my other colleagues from the Ohio History Connection. I'm Jen Altman, the World Heritage Director, so I'm the very lucky person who gets to think about this project all day, every day. And Chief Wallace has been the #1 supporter and leader in helping us to make this happen. So World Heritage is, there are 8 earthworks in Ohio that are on the World Heritage nomination, 5 in Chillicothe. We have 2 pieces of the Newark Earthworks, and then Fort Ancient Earthworks in Warren County, Ohio. And right now we're really actively working on that nomination. I like to say we're first in line for the United States, but we're doing lots of work. So I've talked to many of you here. I know my colleagues have too, but if you have an interest, we would love to talk to you. We got National Park Service folks here, too, from Chillicothe. We all work together. It's a big project. It takes lots of people. But please reach out to us anytime if you have interest in helping or lending expertise. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you.
All right, I think at this time we're going to call up the rest of the presenters and then open the floor for questions about any